If you're trying to learn English, sharing an opinion is a skill that most of you guys can do at the intermediate level. However, persuading or selling a prospective client is an advanced communication skill in English. Today, I'm going to show you a few sophisticated English communication techniques that you can use to disagree or argue without sounding disrespectful. And of course, these techniques will mostly be useful in professional settings. If you're new here, welcome to ARC English. We help professionals go from intermediate to advanced in English much faster by working smarter and not necessarily harder. Now, I am a businessman myself, and I am speaking from a business perspective. However, these advanced techniques in English can apply to various different professions across various different industries. Now, the first method involves softening the no by using the yes and technique. Now, in advanced and more nuanced conversations, especially in professional settings in English, just saying no or I disagree can sometimes be too blunt or too direct in many circumstances. An advanced way to effectively communicate the same thing would be to say yes and before actually pivoting over from their logic to your own requirement. So, for example, if there is a deadline on a project that your company needs to get out, and someone says, I have concerns about the deadline of this project. I believe that it's impossible that we're going to be able to get it out before the end of the week. Instead of saying no or I disagree that we can't get the project out this week, you could simply say something like, yes, I hear your concerns regarding the deadline for the project by the end of this week. And that's why we should put more resources into it so it can be possible to get it done before the end of this week. In professional conversations, and even just in conversations in general in the English language, by acknowledging someone's pain point or by acknowledging what they said before you give your own logic is a more respectful and professional and productive way to communicate in English. If you simply say no or I disagree, it can build animosity among the other person. If you say, yes, I understand you, I hear your concerns, and that's why I believe we should do this, you're leading towards a solution without completely shooting down what the other person said. Now, for some of you listening, this might seem obvious, and you may already know how to apply this advanced communication technique in your conversations. However, depending on what your native language is and where in the world you come from, your culture may be much different, and what's normal and how you communicate in your culture may be considered very rude in most English speaking cultures. And the second advanced communication method comes down to hedging versus directness. So, to put it simply, this comes down to knowing the difference between when to use it seems like versus it is. Whether to speak a little more indirectly versus very directly, just saying, this is how it is, versus it seems like it's like this. Now, keep in mind when it comes to communicating confidently and with some authority in professional settings, you don't necessarily need to be loud or obnoxious. Advanced speakers may use hedging or indirectness to sound more diplomatic or sound more polite in certain stages of a conversation. And then they may use directness and pointing out facts when they want to finalize a statement or even conclude a conversation. So, for example, if you're working on a project at your company and somebody made a mistake in the report that they made, you can simply tell them in a indirect way, it looks like there is a slight discrepancy on your numbers, or it looks like there might be a slight error on your numbers. This is just to sound more polite or more diplomatic before you ask them to redo the project that they just did. Especially before you're about to make a request from another person, you should try to speak in a slightly more diplomatic way, which usually involves speaking in a slightly more indirect way. Now, let's say you are a salesperson and let's say you are selling houses on a street. And let's say all of the houses on the street are more or less the same price and more or less the same size. And then a buyer comes up to you and wants to offer $500,000 less than what all of the other properties are worth. In that situation, because you are so far off on the price and the discrepancy is so far, to make sure that that buyer understands what these properties are worth. And you can be very direct by saying the price that you would like to pay is simply not in line with the market value. You don't need to beat around the bush and be indirect about something like that. You can just be clear, concise, and straight to the point. And in English speaking culture, this is not considered to be rude if you are pointing out facts. Now, if the same buyer brought you an evaluation of the property they wanted to buy and the evaluation didn't really make sense, or it made some big discrepancies or big errors that made the price not an accurate representation of what the product was worth, then you can speak in a more diplomatic way or a slightly more indirect way to try and educate the buyer. So I would say the general rule of thumb is that if there is a huge discrepancy and there's clearly a misunderstanding, you can be direct and just point out facts. This is not considered to be disrespectful when you're communicating in English. However, when there is something that is a little bit more gray or a little bit more intangible that you disagree with, then you should be a little bit more indirect just to sound a little bit more diplomatic. And if you need help with your English communication skills, particularly for work related purposes, then very soon we'll be releasing customized training programs based on your specific profession and your career goals. If you'd like to learn more, I'll leave a link somewhere in the description or the pinned comment below. And the third advanced communication method that I'll show you in this video is using connectors. Now, technically, yes, it is okay to use basic connecting words like but or so, but that is something that is very intermediate, so to speak. When you use slightly more sophisticated connectors or slightly more advanced filler words or phrases, it does make you sound more professional to many people in the English speaking world, especially the business world. By using more nuanced or logical connectors, such as given that or in spite of, for example, it's going to make you sound like you have a much more deeper understanding of what's actually being spoken of. By using more advanced connectors, it's going to show a sophisticated understanding of cause and effect of what was being said. So, for example, instead of saying something like, but because of our low budget, we should buy more of this instead of that, you should say something a little more advanced or a little more sophisticated, such as, given that the budget is fixed, we should prioritize spending more on this instead of that. Or in light of the recent market shift, we should pivot to doing this. And I understand that you're essentially just saying the same thing, but you're just using a little bit more sophisticated vocabulary or expressions. And I understand that you're effectively communicating the same thing, leading to the same solution. However, I am telling you, in the professional world, you will be perceived differently based on the terminology and the words you use and how you deliver them. If you say it in a slightly more sophisticated way, people are going to believe or perceive that you understand it at a much deeper level. Using connectors like this is also a great way to keep a conversation neutral when you're pointing out facts in order to not sound too disrespectful when you're disagreeing or arguing a different point. So, to recap, the 3 advanced techniques you should be applying if you want to sound more professional without sounding more disrespectful, it would be the following: using the yes and technique, which is simply just acknowledging what someone said and then giving your reasoning for why you would disagree. Number 2, hedging versus directness, when to be indirect to be more diplomatic versus when to be more direct to point out facts. that somebody is clearly unaware of. And then how to use connectors such as given that or in light of as two simple examples. And to do this, you really need to drill it. But this is very easy to determine. This is very easy to find. You can do this simply by observing well spoken English speakers, or you can shoot me a message on social media and I can help you and point you in the right direction for how you can get better at using connectors. So, if you want to better your English specifically for work related purposes, be sure to subscribe to this channel for more content like this and leave a comment down below letting me know where you're from and what your native language is and what your profession is. I'm always very curious to know. And if you want to learn the optimal routine to advance your English as a busy professional, be sure to watch the next video on the screen.